USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Edge for October 7th, 2022, where each week we handicap and prognosticate some top games over the weekend. This podcast is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And Jim, it's a change to the name of the podcast. What used to be the USCHO Game of the Week is now USCHO Edge. And why are we doing that?
Well, I think, we are in definitely a different time where, sports gambling, sports gaming, and the ability to bet on college sports has changed a little bit. Don't think of this as a different podcast. We're still going to look at some of the biggest games of the week, and there's no change about that. But I do think we'll look at it with a little different slant. So if you are in a gambling state or you want to place a wager on these games, you can, and we'll try to give you some advice. Please don't take our advice as gospel. We are not that good. We enjoy this sport a lot, and we do look for edges. I personally am in Massachusetts. Unlike Ed, I can't even bet on sports unless I travel to New Hampshire. Ed, you're in a state that you can do whatever you want, pretty much. New York, they're pretty liberal there, but I think that we're trying to give you some good information about games. So even if you aren't a gambler, you're still going to learn a ton from this podcast each week. But if you are, you might get some edges. You might enjoy it, and we'll try to keep it lighthearted. Try to keep it fun.
I know my picks last year in your weekly USCHO Bettor's Edge column, which this podcast parallels. If I had made all those bets, I would have walked away with some pretty good cash at the end of the season.
Yeah, same here. I think I was about 35 units up by the end of the season. I think you were somewhere right in that range. If you're betting $100 in every game, that's a nice little payday at the end of the season.
And I know if I actually had been betting, those results would have been much different. That's the way things go.
And the one other thing I do want to say, we will be joined throughout the season by our good friend Dan Rubin. Most people know him. He's done some podcasting with us over the years. He's written so many columns, and he covered Atlantic hockey. He never covers ECAC for us. He would be here today, except his wife just gave birth to their second child. So congratulations to the Rubins on the birth of their second child.
Yeah, and Dan, after the first, was just this grinning puddle, and I'm sure he's doing the same right now.
I totally agree. I remember being a father my first time myself, so I totally agree.
Well, let's take a look at the top 5 games we have picked, at least 5 significant ones. Number 11, Notre Dame is at number 1, Denver. Denver, the reigning national champion.
And the money line, and these are lines that are at DraftKings. We always are going to use the DraftKings odds. They have some of the most public odds out there, and they've done a better job. In the first year we did this which was just a column, it was they would maybe do 3 games a week. Now, this week, they're up to 13. I think that they're going to continue to expand. But the money line, so let's explain to listeners what a money line is. If you hear us say plus money line, that means you're betting on the underdog if you're going to make a gamble on that. So if we say plus 130, a $100 bet or a $10 bet, you can prorate it, but a $100 bet would yield you 130. That's a plus 130. So that means you would get the 130 as your profit plus the $100 bet back. You'd make $230 on a $100 bet. If you hear us say minus or giving is sometimes the term that goes with it. In this case, Denver is giving, or they're minus 160. You would have to bet $160 to get $100 back. So if you bet $160, you would win $260. Not that great of a profit as it is to bet 100 on a 130 and make $230. So that's the difference. And the other bet that goes with each game that we're going to talk about is over under. That's a goal total. So if you hear us say over under 6. If you bet under and somebody scores 5 goals total, so a 3-2 game, a 4-1 game, a 4-0 game, a 3-1 game, that goes under. 7 goes over, so a 4-3 game, a 5-2 game, a 6-1 game, a 10-0 game, those all go over. When you see just a flat number, so 6, if you get exactly 6, that's called a push. nobody wins, including the house. You just get your money back on that bet. So that's just to kind of simplify it. This game here, Notre Dame is a plus 130. So they are the underdog against Denver, a minus 160 with an over-under of 6. Personally, I'm just going to jump right into this, Ted. Personally, I think that Denver at minus 160 is almost too slight of a favorite. I would have had them at plus 240 for this game. You're defending national champions, banner raising night. You should have a ton of energy in the building. And you're playing a Notre Dame team that I'm not sure that people are positive how strong this Notre Dame team is going to be. That's a big question mark. So, sometimes I always think early season, and we have to think about this, that this is not college football. This is not college basketball where you have all these sharps and these odds makers that are out there setting perfect lines. And if you look at the first couple of weeks of the college football season, it's amazing how often they get lines on games that seem obscure. They get them right, these odds makers. This one to me seems like one that they may have missed. So if you're betting Denver, I would, I don't like, again, we're not going to tell you who to bet, but Denver, I think, feels like you're getting a really good price on them at minus 160. If you can afford to put that type of money down to win $100, that's actually, in my book, that's a pretty good edge. The one caveat I will say is that banner raising nights tend to be a distraction. We saw it last year with UMass. They got blown out of the water by Minnesota State on banner raising night. So maybe you have to be a little cautious there. I'm not sure if the Vegas odds makers are even factoring that in. But right now, Denver at minus 160 feels like too short of a price. They should have been much deeper.
The interesting thing about this matchup to me is that nobody seems to know what kind of a team Notre Dame is going to have. Jeff Jackson always gets teams to perform well. They only have 4 freshmen on the squad, so they're experienced. They did a good job in the transfer portal, but I've seen them picked by different writers, different Big Ten writers, everywhere from 1st to like 5th in the league.
Yep.
People really don't know what they're going to get. Over under. Now this one, I'm going to go out on a limb. I would take the under, and I'll tell you why. Magnus Krona and Ryan Bischel. Bischel had very good numbers last year when he was playing alongside Galida. I think this could be a low-scoring contest. 3-2 would not be surprising. 2-1 would not be surprising. But, I think you're right also about those jitters for home ice. But, so much of that Denver team is back. And you talk about teams taking on the persona of their coach. And cool, calm, collected, professional, confident, business-like. Those are all things that describe David Carl, although I suppose they could also describe Jeff Jackson, but
perfectly to a T.
Yeah. So I would not be surprised. Certainly it would be no surprise to anybody to see Denver back in the Frozen Four, but Notre Dame is a team that I still think could be a dark horse for the Frozen Four if the pieces fall together.
Yeah. Too many question marks for me for Notre Dame right now. Plus 130. I don't even want to pay that price in this game. I feel like if I'm betting Notre Dame, I want to be able to lay 100 to make 200 on them. 130 doesn't seem strong enough. The over under 6, I agree with you. I like it. I'd like the under on it. I wish it was 6.5. And you're not going to see that. We only see 6.5 of the 5 games we're going to preview here. We only see that once. I just wish that half a goal, because I feel like this is one of those games that could be 3-2 late, and then an empty netter goes in, you end up pushing an over-under. It just feels like that. But I also could see this being a 2-1 game, and that under would hit hard. I don't see this being the best over contest out there.
The next one on our roster for this podcast is number 5, Minnesota State, at number 2, Minnesota. And this one's interesting, and maybe you can explain a little bit about it. Both of them are minuses, so it's sort of like they're both favored a bit.
Yeah, it's almost like the bookmaker saying we don't have a favorite here. So we're just going to throw these stupid numbers out. We're going to give the home team a bigger number. So Minnesota State is minus 105. So you have to bet $105 to win 100. Minnesota, you have to bet 125 to win 100. Neither one of them are getting good odds. I do think that this is a good play on Minnesota. If you want to play this is a team that, we've talked about it on our weekly podcast with Derek Schooley. Like, this Minnesota team came back for a reason. There's a lot of players in this lineup that are back. Minnesota State, they lost a lot. Let's just start with Dryden McKay and net. It's very hard to replace, easily one of the best netminders in the country over the last 4 years. I mean, this kid won a Hobie Bake for the right reason. But when I really look at this matchup, neither team stands out to Las Vegas. To me, Minnesota stands out. So at minus 125, that's a great price. And then an over-under of an over-under of 5.5. I think that this Minnesota offense is pretty strong. And I just don't know. And maybe Vegas didn't look into this one deep enough to understand that Dryden McKay isn't here anymore. Maybe they just sit there and say Minnesota State, well, listen, they are just a juggernaut on defense. They have a system-oriented approach. Maybe they think they can just repeat that. But over under 5.5, that's the lowest we're going to see this week. We're going to see it a couple of times, including the next game. But over under 5.5, this one feels like one that's tempting you to bet over. With that, sometimes you have to be cautious. I swear to God, bookmakers make odds to try to tempt gamblers. But I could see this being a 5-2, 5-3, 6-3, 6-4 game easily because of the fact that there's just such an unknown in net for Minnesota State.
Meanwhile, Justin Close has been terrific in net after taking over as the starter midseason last year. Minnesota also has one of the best, if not the best, recruiting classes this year. So I think they're going to pick up where they left off, even though they lose some and they get a guy like Brock Faber back on D. I really like this Minnesota team. Some people are looking for them to run the table. And I also agree with you on the over-under, because if this Minnesota Gophers team stands true to form over the last couple of years, it's a team that has the ability to start scoring in buckets. And if they smell a little blood around the net and break it open, you might see 2 or 3 quick goals and have something break open.
The only thing I think that helped keep this game as a low over-under was the fact that they did not rout Lindenwood last weekend. I think if they had crushed them, 10-0, 8-1, something like that, I think you'd see it as a higher over-under. They didn't. So maybe that's something that's kind of sticking in the mind of Vegas or these odds makers and saying, yeah, maybe they won't score as many goals as you think. This is a really tough team they're going to play in Minnesota State.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Minnesota State play some shutdown hockey, including in the playoffs last year and even the first 2 periods of the national championship game.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget that you had a fantastic goaltender in Dryden McKay. There's no doubt about that. But there were a lot of shutouts that he had where he had under 15 saves. So they did not give up a lot. So think about that, that they don't give up a lot. So there is some systematic things in place. But again, personnel changes. I'm interested to see what the new personnel looks like for Minnesota State.
Well, we're going to take a pause and we're going to look at 3 more games on this first edition of USCHO Edge. This podcast is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
Know how people say life happens? Well, for me, life was happening, and I needed a new truck. I didn't have time to shop around for a good loan, so I got one from the dealer, higher interest and all. Month after month, those payments were squeezing me. So I went to DCU. They refinanced my loan and helped lower my rate, which lowered my payments. These days, I have more money in my pocket for whatever life throws at me. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
And we're back with USCHO Edge. I'm Ed Trefzger across from Jim Connelly. Jim, number 6 Quinnipiac is going to be at Boston College. This one fascinates me with the money line as well.
Yeah, another one where there's no favorite really picked. Minus 120 for Quinnipiac, so a slight edge over minus 110 on Boston College. I think BC's getting a lot of legacy respect right there. I don't think that this team is as good as Quinnipiac. This is a good Quinnipiac team, and I don't think Quinnipiac itself is probably getting the credit that it deserves. Really good team that's returning for Ranpak Technology. Yaniv Peretz in net was the really push come to shove. He was technically the best goaltender in the country last year. I know you had Devin Levi, you had Dryden McKay. Yaniv Peretz did not get the respect, probably because he was a freshman, but boy, is he solid. And I think that is one that you have to really look at as, potentially a player that could be a game changer here. I do like the over under at 5.5. I think that could go either way. This could be a 4-1 game. It could be a 3-2 game. It could also be a 3-2 empty netter game. So really tough one to bet on the over under. I like Quinnipiac at -120. That's a good price to get, but on the road is always a little bit more difficult. Greg Brown, first year head coach, first game officially at the Heights. That's going to be a big thing that they're going to tout up. I'm sure that's going to get the locker room a little fired up. But Rand Pecknold, they find ways to win his team. I like Quinnipiac at -120.
Pecknold has built a great culture at Quinnipiac, but he also approaches the game very systematically, and he's able to plug players in season after season into that and really operate like a machine. And there's a reason that they've been the cream of the crop in ECAC, and that's no small feat when you've got to compete against teams like Clarkson or Cornell or Harvard for the top of the league.
I agree with you there. I mean, you're talking about Harvard, a team that has 15 NHL draft picks on their roster right now, and they were not picked first. Quinnipiac was. And that's a team. Quinnipiac just, despite the fact that they do pull in some young and talented players, I still think that Rand Pecknold has done a really good job of getting some of the older players, more mature players that are kind of on their upswing. They get when they get in as 19 or 20-year-old freshmen, and then they get a couple of years under their belts, and they're bigger, stronger, faster. They're harder to play against. I think that is what makes this Quinnipiac team more successful, and a lot of teams follow that blueprint. It's not just Quinnipiac. You see teams like UMass Lowell does that as well. Even Clarkson, St. Lawrence. I talked to their coach last week, kind of looking for that same footprint, that same blueprint. Minnesota Duluth does something very similar. Some of these teams that have won national championships are not just made up of blue chip recruits from the U.S. National Team Development Program. Not that there's anything wrong with bringing in a bunch of first round draft picks, but as people out in Michigan will tell you, you don't automatically just win a national championship because you have a lineup of first round draft picks.
Is the key to that Quinnipiac BC game going to be in net?
It could be. I think it really will be in the speed. I think that Quinnipiac was a fast team last year. If they've improved on that, they'll be even faster. BC is always known for playing fast, but let's see. There's a lot of inexperience in that lineup. Greg Brown. Let's see what type of a stamp he'll try to put on this program. That's a long time that Jerry York was behind the bench there, so. Things are probably going to change a little bit. Greg Brown worked for him for almost 2 decades as an associate head coach, assistant coach before that. So I feel like there'll be some similarities, but I also think that there'll be enough changes. I still think this is a fast team to play against. Maybe they get a little more size. I think that is one thing that maybe the Jerry York teams didn't have with size, but he found a way to win with skill and speed. So can size be added to that equation to really make this a more difficult team to play against? I guess time will tell.
Miami travels to number 15 UMass Lowell. Chris Bergeron starting his 4th season behind the bench at his alma mater after some pretty good success at Bowling Green, but Bowling Green in the WCHA and the old CCHA before that is a different situation than Miami, who has to battle against a bunch of perennial terrific teams in the NCHC. For a team like Miami, just even cracking into the top 4 in the league is a tall order. So people may overlook the Red Hawks a little bit as they take on the River Hawks. But, Miami has had good teams and some good wins over the past few years. Still a strong favorite in UMass Lowell.
I think the word you used right there was the right one, overlook. And it's so easy to overlook a team that might be the bottom of their league. But the bottom of the NCHC is a lot different than the bottom of, say, the ECAC or the bottom of even Hockey East, for that matter. I think Hockey East has a pretty strong conference top to bottom. So I think if you're UMass Lowell, you have to be careful not to look past Miami. This is a team that is going to be hungry. They got to play 2 games last weekend, split with Ferris State. You know that they've had some time on the ice. You've had time on the ice. UMass Lowell, a 4-0 win over St. Lawrence last Saturday. So it's not like either of these teams are playing their first game. we haven't seen a ton of goal scoring out of either of them. So, Miami is a plus 120, UMass Lowell is a minus 150, but the over under of 6.5, I really have a hard time seeing this, either game in this series getting to 6.5. Of course, these are all odds. We're talking about the Friday games because this is a Friday podcast. We're not going to re-record and have different odds for Saturday's games if these are twin bills. But this one is for Friday's game. 6.5 feels high to me. I could see that game, this easily being a 3-1 game, a 4-1 game. I don't feel it being a 4-3 game or a 5-2 game. It just doesn't feel like that to me. Both of these teams have good defenses. Both have good goaltending. But I do think that, Chris Bergeron, his Miami team, they'll probably be out to try to prove something. You only get so many non-league games. Other than that, you're just trying to battle it out in your conference. And I do think that right now Miami is trying to build. And the way you build is to win big games that are not part of your league. You have to play your league no matter what. You have to play all 7 of those other teams in the NCHC every single year. But when you get to go outside and you get to play a top 20 team, a top 15 team in this case, I think it means a little bit more. And I think that Chris Bergeron will have momentum. And don't think that Norm Bazin won't try to get his team fired up. He's probably talking about disrespect right now. He's probably talking about the fact that nobody even thinks that UMass Lowell belongs in the top 4 of Hockey East. They do right now. I think that there will be a lot of messages. There's a lot of bulletin board material going between these two schools right now.
And interestingly enough, UMass Lowell probably will feel to Miami a little bit like playing Minnesota Duluth or Western Michigan.
I'm sure they will. When you think about the systems and how tough and how heavy Lowell can be, one of the heaviest teams in terms of weight wise, but I always think of heavy, not really about banging bodies, just more of like, you're going to touch a puck and you're going to feel something. And I think that's really what UMass Lowell probably brings to this game, is that they will have a heavy presence. And I kind of expect, just knowing Chris Bergeron teams, they kind of have that trait a little bit themselves. They're not the lightest team to play against. You're going to see a pretty hard checking series out of these two teams. I think that, there'll be a lot of ice bags both Friday and Saturday night in the training rooms afterwards. I think that these players will know that they played 2 hockey games when this weekend's over.
Our final top 5 game to look at has Wisconsin at number 14, Ohio State, a conference game in the Big Ten. Not too many conference games going on this weekend. This feels to me like a make or break season for Wisconsin, and in particular for Tony Granato.
It certainly does. And this first game, I might have, I'm looking at the odds here, plus 165 on Wisconsin. Of the 5 games we've mentioned, that is by far the biggest underdog. Ohio State, a minus 205 favorite, and an over under of 6. I think that line, that money line, feels a little lopsided to me. I looked at the coaches poll right before we got on the air. Wisconsin is actually ranked ahead of Ohio State in the preseason coaches poll in the Big Ten. So there's some feelings that Wisconsin might actually be the better of the two teams here, yet there's such a heavy underdog. And that's historic. Historical facts just being thrown in there. Wisconsin had a tough season last year, coming off a great season the year before. Ohio State, they performed above and beyond what I think a lot of teams thought. They think that'll continue, and I do too. I think that Ohio State's a pretty good team. I've had them ranked, but I know I also had Wisconsin ranked in my top 20 for both of the 2 polls that we voted on this season. So I'm curious to see if Wisconsin really is that big of an underdog. I would not be surprised to see if they split this series over 2 nights and which night they win, of course. I always try to favor the road team on the first game because it's just easier to come in on the road sometimes and surprise an opponent. Second night, there's not a lot of surprises. Opponents are more ready for you, the home team. So I do feel like if there is going to be an upset, it will be on Friday night. We'll see if Wisconsin can do it, but I really do like them with that type of a price, plus 165. That's a pretty healthy price to get on Wisconsin.
Paula Weston, writing the Big Ten preview for this season, describes Ohio State as a team that always seems to be just around the corner from making a step up. And when you've got Minnesota and Michigan and Notre Dame in your league, you can have a very good team and still have that to overcome. And I think Rollick has put together some good teams at Ohio State in the past few years. The wild card for me with Wisconsin is going to be what they do in goal. They got a big transfer to come in net in Kyle McClellan. And people are saying, well, who's Kyle McClellan? All he did was take a near the bottom of the league Mercyhurst team in Atlantic hockey and put them on his back and carry them all the way to the league's Final Four weekend. I mean, just terrific numbers. And if you watch him, you're watching him and saying, how is he making these saves? But he's making, just incredible saves. You can get a lot of mileage and a lot of mojo out of a goaltender that can do that for you.
It's ironic, Ed, because in the age of grad transfers, I get surprised that we don't see more come out of Atlantic hockey, because I think that some of the goaltending in that league is elite. That is where you see some unbelievable goaltending performances night in, night out. But a lot of coaches, for some reason, don't believe in goaltenders coming out of that league for various reasons. I think that the thought of McClellan coming into a program like Wisconsin and maybe taking over the reins and getting a chance, boy, the sky's the limit. If you've played big games, now you get to play really big games against good opponents. If you have your fundamentals down, you're a good goaltender, you're going to win no matter where you are. So I look at, a situation where Wisconsin has a chance to upset in Ohio State, and you've got this guy that nobody is respecting. Boy, is there anybody in net that would want to win a game than, a guy who has never probably been highly respected in his entire career? He's now playing in the Big Ten. That's respect, and he'll have to earn it. But boy, if he has a couple of big outings, he'll earn it quickly.
Well, Jim, everybody can read up more on this in your weekly column, USCHO Bettor's Edge. Our 8 columnists and writers for Division I hockey all will make their picks, and we'll see as the season goes along, just for fun, how everybody does.
It's fun. It's always enjoyable to write. And this is, I know that not everybody looks at college hockey as a big betting sport, and we don't necessarily either, but we always think that there's some great hockey to preview every weekend. We'll continue to do that. And if you do like to throw a wager down or two every weekend, hopefully our information gives you a little bit of an edge, but I don't want to, I'm going to say it once more. Don't take this as gospel. We hold no responsibility for lost bets on this site.
It's for entertainment purposes only, and hopefully you've been entertained. USCHO Edge is sponsored by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org. Find our podcast at uscho.com/podcasts, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, and Spotify, and probably apps and places we've never heard of. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Edge.